Hello, my name is Russell Preston Brown from Adobe Systems, and you are watching the second part of a two-part series on solar eclipse imaging. In this tutorial, I'm going to discuss some super advanced tips and techniques for imaging eclipse photography. Okay, I first have to say, before I continue, that the images I'm using in this project were photographed by none other than the MrEclipse, and that's Fred Espenak. So I thank him so much for loaning me these images so I can demonstrate some of the issues that you might confront as you photograph your own images of the upcoming August 21st eclipse. In this tutorial, I'm going to discuss two different super user tips and techniques. The first is to adjust the alignment of the images. You notice here in this image, it seems to be misaligned. Some of the exposures in this smart object stacked image are not aligned. I want my results to look like this. And the second half of this tutorial will discuss image sharpening. I have a super advanced technique for sharpening your images, and the results should look like this. This technique uses calculations. You may not have used calculations since Photoshop 1.0 was released in 1990. But in this case, calculations work perfectly. Okay, let's get started with the first part where we're going to align the images. Of course, in the first part of this series, we learned how to take all of our exposures and bring them together into one image called a smart object, and we stacked those images with a blend mode called mean. Over here to the right, I'm going to double click on the smart object that I created earlier. And I want to look at each of the frames that were photographed in this series. Now, Fred uses a very sturdy equatorial mount with a clock drive so that each of his frames is aligned right in the center of the image area. But you may not have the luxury of photographing with such high-end equipment, and your solar eclipse imagery may drift around the frame. And in that case, you may need to do some manual alignment. And this is how you can do it. With all of these 9 exposures open, in this case, I'm going to select the top 8 exposures here. Then I'm going to set my blend mode to difference. This is a super easy, quick way to align images. With the blend mode of difference, I can now see areas here which show that there is a problem with the alignment. I can then turn off the visibility of most of the layers here, and I can go through each of these layers one by one to see where my alignment problem is. And here it is. I'm going to tap on that layer and make sure it's selected. And then in this case, I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge this over, and I can make a manual adjustment to this. That looks great. I can continue to go through my other images one by one to ensure that they are all aligned as well, just like that. Okay, now I'm going to turn back on the visibility of all of my layers. Then I'm going to select all the layers, as you see here, because I need to switch from the difference mode that they're currently set in back to the normal mode, just like this. Excellent. And then I can close this document and save it. So now all of my adjustments will then be saved, and then they'll be applied to that smart object. And here we are back to our image. Let's take a look at the before and then the after. I've realigned those images perfectly. The next step is to align all of the images into the exact center of my image area. As you can see here, I currently have my rulers open. If I double tap on my rulers, I can bring up my rulers preferences. And you can see here that I have my rulers set to percentage. I then select OK, and now I can drag from the left, in this case, a guide out, hold down my Shift key and snap to the 50% point. From the top, I can drag a second guide, shift key down, and snap it to the 50% point here. So now I have a reference point. I'm going to target my layer with my move tool, and then I can readjust this as you see here. If I need to do any fine tuning to this, I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard, but I want to get this almost exactly right in the center, just like that. Now, let's go ahead and hide those guides with Command H or Control H. This looks great. We're now ready to do the second half of my tutorial, and that's all about sharpening. In many cases, when you photograph an eclipse, you don't always have the perfect weather. There's sometimes a haze in the sky or a thin layer of clouds. And in many cases, the corona is not quite as sharp as you'd want it to be. Let's get started. I'm first going to flatten my entire image, just like this, and start right here with just one layer. I'm going to double tap here on the layer, and let's name this original image, just like that. Then I'm going to duplicate this by clicking and dragging it down here to the base of my layers tabbed panel, and I have a duplicate. Let's name the duplicate radial blur, just like that. So let's get started. I'm going to select my radial blur image right here. Then from my filter menu down to blur and over to radial blur. Check this out. I've set my amount to 20, my blur method to spin, and my quality down here set to best. You'll notice how important it is that your eclipse image is right in the center, because it's going to then spin around the center. We don't want the disk of the sun to be blurred. We only want the corona to be blurred, as you see here. This looks great. Now we can go up to our calculation menu. Under Image, Calculations, right here. Okay, here under source number 1, under Layer, I want you to select Radial Blur. And for Channel, select Gray. Under source number 2, you're going to select the original image and select Gray again. And down here, you're going to select Subtract. We're going to subtract one image from the other image and use an offset of 120 and a scale of 1. And your results look like this. It's almost like a 3D view of the image of the corona around the sun. We're going to click OK. Now we have this image that we see here on the screen, and it is saved in our Channels tabbed panel called Alpha 1. Now, from the Select menu, select All. From the Edit menu, we're going to select Copy. We've copied that entire image. Let's select the RGB here at the top so we can go back to our composite image. Select our Layers tabbed panel here, and let's turn off the visibility of our radial blur layer so we can see our original. Now from the Edit menu, I'm going to paste. So we've pasted a copy of that calculation we created right over our image. And here it is, our final step. Under the blend mode, we're going to select Overlay. Wow. So we've now added super advanced sharpening techniques to this image. Let me turn the visibility off and then back on again. And if you really like this technique, I always say if one layer looks good, 2 layers might look better. Simply click and drag this down to the base, and you now have doubled the strength of this technique for sharpening your image. There you have it. You've seen 2 super advanced techniques. The first, we learned how to align the images manually here for the Eclipse photography. And in the second technique, we used a super advanced calculation to calculate and enhance the corona around the sun. Give these techniques a try after you've photographed this upcoming eclipse. If you want to know more information about the eclipse and eclipse photography, be sure and check out the links you see here. There you have it. Have a great eclipse adventure.